Welcome to Sonship Podcast with my guest today, Tineke Ziemer. We're talking about the damage that toxic religion has caused in our life, but also the road out of it for her.
Listen, obviously this is a podcast about faith and stuff, and so what is your faith background, Tineke? What was your experience of God, Christianity, religion growing up?
Well, I grew up in what I've come to realize was quite a strict background, Christianity-wise. My dad, when he was younger, was raised in like the Church of Christ, which is very fundamentalist and stuff like that. And then his family kind of, had a little bit of an awakening and stepped out of like that super works-based modality. But I think a lot of the core beliefs or the traditions were still carried through. So like, for example, we did not celebrate Christmas for most of my growing up years because of the verse in the Bible that says one day should not be put above another. It's like very literal translations of things like that. So we did not have like a church building or anything like that. We met in homes, and there was different levels of structure kind of throughout my lifetime within the home church thing. When I was younger, they did have elders and everything was quite organized. And then probably in the last 20 years, it switched to more of a kind of a chill vibe, like hang out in the living room, sing some songs, different people could share and stuff like that. When I was younger, there was absolutely like no involvement from women in any of the, discussions or anything like that, because they were still quite strict about women not being able to speak in the church. As I grew up, that kind of changed because, my dad was like the key leader in our home church, and his understanding of like authority changed, and he didn't really feel that anyone was meant to have authority over each other in the kingdom of God. Okay. So in that case, the verses that said that women cannot have authority over a man didn't really apply in our meetings because we were all just sharing and nobody was technically taking authority. So, there was a progression towards things, opening up. Our kind of calling, what we felt for many years within that was to like bring unity among Christians. So we did a lot of traveling to all the other churches in our town. With my ex-husband, I used to publish like a newsletter that had articles from all different Christians in Quesnel, and we would send that out to all the churches. And we had different things like Bible camp at our house. And I led Bible studies literally from the time I was 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
I started teaching Bible studies in the forest at school on lunch break.
My goodness.
I was very gung-ho. That was kind of like how my dad raised us. We did not have like you go to Sunday and on Sunday you're a Christian. It was like everything we did with our entire life was meant to be for the kingdom. And so that was how I made him proud. And so all throughout high school, I did Bible studies like 3 days a week at lunch. And I ran a youth group that ended up being where like all my friends met their husbands.
Oh dear.
Yeah, we all got basically all the couples formed from the youth group. And then after I got married, which I was married very young, we carried on with that ministry for a really long time. So I would say that my background was the Bible was taken very literally, and we were very much meant to live that in our daily walk. And I wanted to please God and please my dad, so I took that very seriously.
Wow, that's pretty full on.
Yeah, it was.
Now I know that's not where you're at now, and we'll go on to talk about. In fact, no. Why don't we start talking about it just now? I mean, like, because you and I have had conversations. We've met up when you were in Scotland for coffee and stuff and lunch, and would chat away. And wow, you are not that chick anymore.
That's for sure. I know, my friends and I laugh because we get together now and we have drinks and we're all being goofy and we think, oh, we used to have Bible studies together and we used to knit and stuff like that. That was our...
You used to knit?
Yeah, we would sit around and knit and talk about Jesus.
I just can't imagine you doing that.
Right? I tried so hard to fit the role of like the traditional Christian wife and mother, but it's just... that's the wrong size shape for me,
So did you feel that you were trying to be squeezed into that, or you just felt this is what everyone thinks and so I should conform to it? How did that feel for you?
Well, with us growing up, there was a very, very kind of strict divide between like, these are the girls' jobs, these are the boys' jobs. So, and I don't think that was necessarily like how all Christianity is or anything, but in our household, I had two brothers. I was the oldest. And so me and my mom were responsible for like the housework and the cooking, cleaning and stuff. And the guys would do the outside work, the farm chores, building the fences, all those kind of things. The problem was I wanted to be outside doing the farm chores and building the fences and all that. So my mom was so excited when she had a baby girl, thinking, oh, we're going to bake together and we're going to do all these fun things. And it was torture for me. Torture. No. And my parents have a huge house. Like, we built that house ourselves when I was about 13 years old, 2.5 years. I think you guys do your measurements slightly different there, but it's 6,000 square feet. Wow. If somebody has
that's big.
It was big. Yeah. So huge. Like 7 bedrooms and like 5 bathrooms and all that kind of stuff. So then there's just me and my mom to clean this. And, I literally would rather do anything but. So I would have to do my inside chores. And then I would also go outside and voluntarily do the outside chores because I loved having the horses and the cows and all those things. Right. And
you were allowed to do that. It wasn't like get back inside or anything. It wasn't as strict as that.
I loved spending time with my dad. I wanted to be hunting and fishing and outside building the fences with him, mucking out the barn and all that kind of stuff. That was, for me, it was like quality time with my dad. And I was allowed to do it for sure. I wasn't required to do it.
Yeah.
One good thing is my parents didn't raise me as if I wasn't allowed to have like a career. It was it was kind of like a dichotomy within me because of that, because, I was definitely raised that, once you become a mom, you work from home, you don't have a job outside the home. And, your number one job as a like Proverbs 31 to the nth degree, right? Was like we were taught to be. That's like the most, as a Christian woman, that chapter in the Bible, the Proverbs 31, is literally like the most shameful result.
Women just get beaten over the head with that all the time, and I think it's a totally misunderstood verse or verses.
I think so too now, but at the time it was just like, I read that and I think I'm failing at everything, right? I mean, this is funny though. Our girls group actually called our Bible study PR 31 girls. That was our attempt to like embrace it and be like, okay, let's learn how to can food. Let's learn how to make bread from scratch. Like we were really trying hard to like kind of fit that mold.
Get some preserve recipes.
Exactly. But anyway, within my family, so yes, that modality of like when you're married, this is your job was very prominent. But also I was always raised to like excel in academics and like do my very best. And I was asked like, what do you want to be when you grow up? So, I had the kind of like brainwashing, I think, of like that, I need to get married young, have a family and be a good wife. But then I was also a very ambitious person. Yeah, exactly.
That's confusing.
It was really like, I think I fought that battle within myself until I kind of left Christianity behind, which was only a couple years ago, and I ended up marrying an amazing man. My ex-husband is such an amazing person and we're still really close and everything. It was just a chance for him to maybe do what was more authentic to him. I think for both of us, like, because I got married at 19 because that was the right thing to do. That's how it worked in our circles. And, it was really obvious quickly that probably we were not the right fit for each other. But we also, I think, had a lot of pressure to try to fit those different molds. And my ex-husband is a very passive person. He has a servant type heart. I hate using anything that sounds like Christianese, but anyway. He just loves to help people. He's a behind the scenes kind of guy. And I'm a very ambitious, upfront, big dreamer. Let's make all these things happen. So we actually functioned well in that way, and that he came along and like helped my business to grow. We did so many amazing pursuits together, but neither of us felt like we were fitting into that traditional Christian role where he was supposed to be the man and be kind of dominant and make the decisions. And, I was supposed to be passive and meek and be like, oh, well, here's your slippers, in the morning and stuff. That was just never going to happen.
But that's really difficult, because if that's not who you are, but you're trying to be that, I mean, that must cause all kinds of problems for you and also for your marriage.
Exactly. I kind of feel like we didn't really have a fair start because of both of us trying to be somebody that we weren't within the marriage. So yeah, for me, it led to like just trying to overachieve in other ways to try to get that sense, some kind of sense of like having a purpose and fulfilling something well. When I had my kids, I was already running my own business, and I did my very best to like be a good mom while still doing that. And that when I had an office outside of the home for a few years, my kids spent so many hours of their life with me at work. And then eventually I moved at home and, tried to balance the two. But I think a lot of women, because I was also like very active within like the church community at that time, and constantly running those types of events, as well as running my company, trying to be a good mom, homeschooling my kids, trying to teach them everything about how to be good little Christian children. It was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah, but of course, women are useless at administering things,
Yeah.
No, I don't believe that.
Yeah, we ended up in a really interesting experience, to do with that kind of thing, because we were still attending our home church, but we were also going to like more of a typical evangelical church on Sunday mornings. And we had a new pastor and his family come in and kind of, start revamping everything. And one of their issues was just they didn't feel comfortable with us having our own Bible studies and everything at our own home with our own people, because those were Christians from all different churches, and they really felt like you're supposed to stick with just your own church.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they were definitely against like women in leadership and everything like that. So we ended up having an excruciating decision at that time, but ended up leaving that evangelical church because it just did not fit with what we felt that God had for us to do, which was to not have these boundaries on different denominations. Like our whole purpose for the past 20 years had been to bring Christians together. And all of a sudden we were being told that we were supposed to actually kind of hold everybody at arm's length and just stick to this one little denomination that we weren't members of, because we didn't do church membership or anything. But yeah, there's so many things that I could talk about. It's crazy.
And you're spinning all those plates. I mean, surely they must have come crashing down at some point.
Yeah. So I struggled with my mental health, but of course was never allowed to call it that. For a lot of my life, and never knew, because, we were kind of taught that like, if you're praying enough and if you have a good relationship with Jesus and you're not sinning, then you won't have these problems. But I used to self-harm as a teenager because I really fundamentally believed at my core that I was a bad person. Those are the messages that were given within our understanding of God, was that, as human beings, we were vile. We were unworthy of even being in his presence because of, even if we just did one sin, right? So I feel that not all my friends that grew up Christian have had the messages said to them as blatantly as that. But like I was told repeatedly, there's nothing good in you at all. The only good that can come out of you is when Jesus is doing something. But, if God even looked at you, you would be worthless to him. But Jesus is blocking your view. So at least God is seeing Jesus and not you, because you're worth nothing. So I didn't know that I had internalized that to the point. I just remember as a teenager praying over and over and over for God to make me a better person. I felt like there was something wrong with me and I didn't know what it was. So I didn't know how to express that emotion. Emotions were not valued in our family.
Right.
Emotional expression was limited to like, you're crying because you love Jesus, or you're crying because you broke your leg. Those were kind of the two reasons you were allowed to show emotion. So my only way at that time that I could find to release that emotion was to hurt myself. And I directed my anger and hatred inwards for most of my life. So, how did that
make you feel? On top of all of that stuff about being a horrible person and then you're self-harming, and yes, it brings momentary relief because it focuses you elsewhere, but that must then throw it all back upon you when you kind of like come out of that place.
Yeah, it's basically what happened is when my parents found out I was doing it, they responded by punishing me. Because they were like, how could you do this to us? You think you have a bad life, but you don't. it had nothing to do with my
Wow.
life. It had to do with what I believed about myself. So I was grounded for it and not allowed to see my friends or anything. So yeah, I think you're right. It did. I hadn't really thought that through before, but I think it did bring shame that I was doing that as well because of the response. Instead of like compassion and being like, oh my goodness, what are you struggling with that's making you want to hurt yourself? It was, how could you do this to us? We need to punish you more. And I've approached my dad about that a couple of years ago and said, why did you respond to me punishing myself with punishing me more? And he didn't really have an answer. And I think we're all doing the best we can as parents. Like, seriously, it's so hard raising kids and not know, you're doing your best, but that was something they'd never dealt with before. I don't have unforgiveness for them about that. I just know that it perpetuated that shame and that belief that I really was like a bad person. And I dealt with that by, trying to overachieve and trying to be as successful as I could at everything.
Do you know what's interesting as I'm listening to you, that I keep on hearing all of these restrictions on you, mainly because you're female, like you can't do the outside jobs, you can't teach the Bible, you can't be in leadership, you can't you can't get a job when you're married, you can't do all of these things.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that must have had an impact upon you over time. And you and I have talked a little bit about it, but I'd love for folks to hear you and talk a little bit about that.
It's a weird thing because I don't look back on my life and remember ever feeling that way. I think I just accepted that was God's way. It was kind of like not celebrating Christmas when all of our friends talked about Christmas and everything. We just thought that they were doing the wrong thing and we were doing the right thing, So like, I don't remember feeling oppressed as a woman ever. I actually thought that people that talked that way were silly. But it wasn't until I started to see the effects of that in my life, once my eyes were kind of open to those things actually being harmful, then I started to see the effects in my life. But while I was in that perfect little bubble, then everything just functioned really smoothly if I stayed in that role. Like we talked about earlier, I did feel the internal guilt and that battle of being like, oh, I don't really submit to my husband. Like, my husband always treated me as an equal. And so he didn't force those things upon me. And so for a long time, we did what worked for us. And yes, I felt guilty when other people would bring that up or ask about it. One way that kind of played out is that when, our marriage, when we decided to end it, which was kind of at my ex-husband's, decision in a very kind way. It was really like, we've done this for 20 years. Our kids are grown up. We both know that this was not authentic for us. So and it was partially because we were understanding God in such a different way that we no longer felt bound to those exact doctrines anymore. But when that happened, we didn't say who made the decision because we knew that whoever that was would be thrown under the bus. So we just, we just told our friends and family that it was, that we had decided this. I didn't want Len, because he is a passive and kind person. I didn't want him to be attacked. But anyway, when it started coming out that my beliefs were changing, that God's love was more inclusive. And then, in the meantime, the marriage was unraveling and stuff. Len started getting a lot of texts and emails from my dad saying, why aren't you keeping your wife in line? I can't believe you're letting your wife believe these things. And it went on for months that Len was being harassed, about how he could possibly let me have these beliefs. Meanwhile, Len and I were on the same page about our beliefs. And he also didn't believe that he was in charge of what I believed. It eventually got to the point, because these were coming in at work and everything, that he had to just actually block my dad, and I cried. I cried so hard when he blocked my dad, because even though my dad had a different viewpoint, and I know I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but
it's okay.
I still loved my dad, even though he had chosen, to treat us this way in response to our beliefs changing. So it was a hard thing to do, but I'm proud of Len for doing that, because I don't think I could have. And he stepped up and kind of protected me. And to me, that was love. That was love.
That's cool. Yeah,
exactly.
That's amazing.
We were always taught tough love. Tough love is what love is. Right. So, so my whole life, Many times there was situations where we had to disfellowship people or different things like that because of them living in such a way that was, against the Bible or whatever, our interpretation of the Bible, or they did something that was offensive. Now I'm on the receiving end of that, and I have been before as well by my dad, 15 years ago as well then. So that was that, but that was considered love. They really believe that it is their responsibility to bring myself or these other people back to God by removing their relationship with him.
So it's really like, basically everything's okay until you step out of line with what people think is right,
exactly,
or what people think is godly, and as soon as you step out of line of that, then there's there's force brought, there's coercion to go back into some sort of conformity.
Yeah,
wow.
Very much so. And they, of course, they have the verses from Matthew. I can't remember, Matthew 18 or something, maybe around there, where it's like, if you're offended, then you go to the person, and then if they still don't change, you go with two people. And if they still don't change, you bring it to the whole church, and then you treat them as a pagan and a tax collector. So, although I've heard those verses many times in my life to make me conform to disowning people, and or when I've been disowned for my choices. So, and I think it's like out of fear. I think it's out of fear that's done. And it is a control tactic.
Obviously you're in that and it's normal for you, but I'm listening to it and I'm thinking, this is so toxic and so trauma-inducing. But you're right, when you're in it, you don't realize that that's what it's doing to you.
Exactly, that's normal.
Or the trauma that you begin to bear, because this is what life is, and I have to carry it for Jesus or whatever,
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The way it started showing up in my life or whatever was, obviously I self-harmed as a teenager. I forced myself to stop doing that just out of sheer determination at a certain point. And I focused all my energy on these positive pursuits, but probably 2 or 3 times a year, I would hit rock bottom. Like, I don't deserve to live. There's something wrong with me. Why am I here? Like, I'm a bad person. So I would, something would trigger those beliefs about myself as being just bad at the core, and I would fall hard. So I knew that there was problems that way, because that happened.
We can edit this out, by the way, if it's not. But how did you fall hard? What was that fall like? Was it alcohol? Was it cutting yourself? Or,
No, like that's the thing. I'm so glad, because that's one thing. Alcohol was never a part of our lives, like not even a drink. So that was part of the strict, doctrines and stuff like that. My escape, my addiction was work, was my career. So that's what I did most of the time. But when I fell, I just checked out. I just would sit in the bathtub or lay in bed crying for 2 or 3 days until I could clear that heavy weight of feeling worthless and thinking that the people, I was making life worse for the people around me and things like that. Right. So, and I feel sad because my kids saw those times. My kids were amazing little human beings, very compassionate. And, it's sad that they would come and see mommy crying and be like, Mom, but we love you. You are a good person. We want you to still be okay and stuff like that. Right. And Len did his best. Len's not an emotionally, he's quite a withdrawn person. So it was hard for him, but he did his best to, be like, maybe you should get out of the bathtub before you drown, those kind of things. So wow. I hit that place in 2020, just after the pandemic hit, because when it hit, it took away some really big things that I had put my heart and soul into. And I felt like it was a punishment from God, and I could not get out of that dark place. So I stayed there for probably 2 months. We couldn't leave our house anyway. And I still had laughter with my children, and we were baking and we were doing things, but my whole world fell out from underneath me at that time. And, I remember saying to my dad, like, I think God is punishing me. I sent him an email and he wrote back and he said, do you really think that God would stop the whole world for you? And I remember how like that hit me in a different way than what I think he intended. Maybe he was trying to say like, no, you're not being punished because, you know, you're not that important. I mean, I took it like, yeah, I do think that love would stop the whole world for its child. You know, like not to punish me, but
that's good.
Something about that triggered these thoughts in my mind about, is that how distant God really is? Like, I don't know. And so I went on to this track where, you know, probably doubts and things that had been building for years finally, you know, came into my conscious thinking. And what changed everything for me was just knowing that I could never do that kind of punishment to my own children. You know, I felt guilty because I was meant to be going on a trip to Europe with my oldest for 7 weeks, and we had worked and saved. My oldest had done homeschool or a summer school for 3 summers. So we had this time at the end of their, you know, graduation year to go do this. And they were going to be doing a documentary of all the countries we were going to. And we were 2 days from leaving when everything hit. So I felt like, see, that was really selfish of me for wanting to bring my kid on this trip when I should have been using that money to like help people in need or something. And that's where my train of thought started going. Like I had spent the 6 months from the time we bought the tickets having nightmares and feeling shameful because I thought that I was doing something wrong. And so I kept being like, God, can you just give me a purpose for this trip? Like maybe I need to evangelize to people wherever we're going. Like, and that's kind of how I had lived my whole life. Anytime I did something positive for myself, I felt guilty unless I could find some way to make it for God. So when that was taken away, it just seemed to me like, oh, look, I am a bad person. Look what I was doing. I deserve this. So yeah, so rock bottom came, and that's when I started realizing that love doesn't do that. Love doesn't do that. I wanted to take my child on this trip. I didn't want to punish my child for wanting to see the world.
So how did you make that leap, if you like, or that connection between this God who is away there and he punishes and he deals harshly with you to, wait a minute, this is all about love? I mean, was that the great leap, or was it just a gradual realization, or was it just like a sudden revelation? Or
yeah, it was such a change, but it took me about 2 months. This is so funny because I was in my little bubble, right? Like the world was shut down. I had only ever grown up, never, you know, you don't listen to doubts. You don't entertain doubts because then you let the devil in. Like I didn't know that this was happening worldwide on a massive scale, that people were deconstructing from evangelicalism and, you know, this view of a monstrous God. I just knew what was happening inside of me. And I was looking at my kids and I was like, I don't think that God can be real if he would send his children to hell, or if he would, you know, all the things like, oh, you were in a car accident, you must have been sinning in your life. Like these were all these toxic beliefs that we had growing up, where it was like, if you're sinning, then you kind of deserve the bad things that come your way. Right. And all of a sudden, because I let myself ask these questions, I started feeling like, wait, I would never, like if I had any way possible to protect my children, I would protect them. I would never cause these things to happen to them. But, you know, we had that kind of love-hate or love-fear relationship with God, right? Where it's like, oh, he's our father, you know, he loves you no matter what. He loves you unconditionally. But if you do one sin, you're not worthy of his presence and you deserve to go to hell. So
yeah.
It was very toxic.
Did you ask these questions while you were growing up, or were they just all burning inside of you and suddenly they all started tumbling out, or what? How did that work?
I didn't ask a lot of questions when I was younger, but, you know, my dad and I had healthy debates quite often where I would question him on things that he was saying. But, you know, I think subconsciously or maybe even consciously, we both knew the outcome was always that by the end of the conversation, I agreed with him, you know. It was the process of debating that was fun for us, but my dad was my hero. He was my spiritual leader. You know, but I felt like he was next to God as far as if I needed to know what to do with my life. I didn't go to my husband. I went to my dad.
Yeah.
So I didn't question things very often, but when these questions started coming during the pandemic, I did go to him, and we were, not allowed in each other's homes, but they have a huge piece of property. So once a week or so, we were going to their property with like my kids' best friend so that they could have a social distance walk. And my dad was out working in his orchards, and I told him, I said that I was starting to like question some things about whether the Bible was like meant to be 100% God's word and everything in it is exactly so, or whether it was more like these people's experiences and them sharing, and it was one way to encounter God, but it wasn't meant to, guilt and control people. And the first thing that he said, he turned to me, stopped cutting the bushes for a second, and he turned to me and he said, well, the main thing you need to remember here is that there is nothing good in you at all. And I was open. I didn't feel afraid. I said, that's the exact issue that I'm having, is I would never tell that to my children. I would never say that. And if God is my father, I've been taught that he's my parent figure, then how could he say that to me or any of his children? Because I can't be better at loving my children than God is.
Yes.
I mean, and I'm just a human being, and I would die for my children. I would go to hell before I'd let them go to hell. You know what I mean? So how could the God that we believe in be somebody that would send his own kids to hell? It stopped making sense to me. Just very suddenly stopped making sense to me. And that's when I started approaching these things. So then, my dad and I carried on a conversation for a little while about some things. And then he just said, well, you need to remember the scripture that says, he who doubts will not receive his reward in heaven. And I said, that's the control and manipulation that is turning me away from Christianity right now. And so, from that point, time went on. I had the most incredible transformation that happened like this one day. So, I had 2 months of being at rock bottom. My kids were like, Mom, we love you so much, and trying to help me feel better. I just felt like, what do I do? And I started a online art therapy class with people from all over. And we were all processing our emotions to do with the pandemic through these art projects that I would send out. Yeah. And so I was starting to explore this fight I was feeling within me that was like, I can't believe in this anymore. But if I walk away from this, I am going to lose my friends, my family, my foundation, like everything I've ever known. So it was terrifying. And I started letting myself express that through these art projects that were kept private. Yeah. So I started right from the self-harm and everything. So
you're not going to show them to us here, no?
Oh, I'll be happy to show them to you at the time. I've done a public art show and everything with them now.
I'm teasing you.
But here, I'll show you. I have a couple of them right here.
We get to see the inner workings of Tineke. Oh, yeah, wow.
So this one was, it's hard to probably see on the screen, but it was believing.
The slashes, and the blood.
Yeah, and it's through the canvas. So the canvas was representing my skin, obviously. And as I sliced the canvas, and the paint came through from the back. Instead of painting on the canvas, it came through from the back. Wow. And I don't know if you can see, there's just the shreds of the paper and everything from where the slashes were. Yeah. And that's where I was exploring this belief that I'd had inside of myself of being wicked for, my whole life. And I literally said at that point, I am not leaving this place until I defeat it once and for all. So I let myself stay in those dark thoughts. I think so much of my life has been, if I have those thoughts, that's sinful. It's sinful to, have this much anger directed at myself and all these things. So it was always, how can I get myself out? How can I feel better? What can I do? I've always been proactive about not wanting to let mental health issues get me down, but something changed this time. And I realized I'm not healing from this. It's happening all throughout my life in these episodes, and I'm never healing from it. So I was like, this time I'm not going to be scared of it. I'm actually going to sit in it and let it tell me what's going on. Wow. Which was terrifying. But I lived through it.
But that's the thing, isn't it? If we don't sit with it, because everything, and I realized like you, I realized a lot of my life, a lot of what I did was to run away from what was inside me.
Yeah.
To escape it, to escape the fear, the depression, the anxiety and everything else. And I'd be busy, or I'd take drugs and I'd drink alcohol and do all kinds of stuff. And all it was running away. And like you, it wasn't until I learned to sit with it, and it's blooming painful to sit with, because it's not just realizations about what lies you've been told but it's realizations about who you are and what you could have been and what you still can be, that it can really mess with you. And that's
for
a
me,
great
it was
point,
like
sitting with it.
It was, it was. I was always raised like, if you have Jesus, you're supposed to be joyful, because look at what he's given you. He's given you freedom. He's given you joy. That's your testimony. That's your witness to the world, is to have joy in all circumstances. My middle name is Joy, and my dad always told me that was so I would remember order of importance. And first comes Jesus, then comes others, and then comes yourself. Joy. So, and that was like my mantra for life. And so for me, it was like, to not be joyful felt that I was letting God down in some way. So I couldn't stay in those places. I had to try to get out of them as quickly as possible. Yeah. And it was not until I was 38 years old that I finally said, wait a second, maybe these places are not evil or wicked. Maybe these are just a part of me that needs to be heard.
Wow. That's profound. Say that again, Tineke, because I think there's something really profound in that.
Yeah. So I looked at it like, maybe these places inside, these dark places, were not bad or evil. They weren't meant to be pushed away. They weren't a sin. They were really just a part of me that needed to be heard. Wow. And that's what happened, is I found out I didn't ever feel loved. When I sat in that place, I realized that I felt I did not know what unconditional love was, other than through my children. The other people in my life, and the way that I was raised, love was still very conditional. And that's why if we didn't toe the line, we would get disfellowshipped. We knew that always. And I realized that I didn't love myself, and I didn't really believe that God loved me either. I was always like, God's probably going to give me the worst calling ever, because that's how he'll change me. I was always like, okay, the one thing I don't want to do is go to Africa. And then I was like, but I know he's probably going to send me there because of that, So my view of God, even though I joked about it, my view of God was really that, whatever you are afraid of or you don't want, he's going to find that, and he is going to force that on you so that you grow as a person. That's how things were done.
I mean, that was a thing that I thought as well. I really believed that that's what God did.
Yeah. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
That's why.
Because somehow that was him working in you,
Yeah. He was taking away the parts of you that hadn't conformed to him yet,
But I wonder how many people have gone out to mission fields and into ministries and all that, believing that lie and never actually fulfilling their true calling.
Exactly. Like the things that God put inside of you as your passions. And, to me, again, everything started going through the filter of my children, because my kids were just at that age. They were like, my oldest was graduating that year and going on with their life. And I thought, not once did I ever think, well, my kids better do this with their life or I won't be happy. It was, for me, raising my children was like this incredible chance to discover this little human and find out, what did they love? What made them happy? What gifts could I buy them? Because that's their hobby now. This is the thing they were excited about. Oh, you're into drumming, Joe? Here's a drum set for Christmas, or whatever, because you want to see them give birth to these little ideas that they have, or these little flames that start. And so both of my kids are musicians, and my oldest was prepared.
I bet you quickly repented of buying those drums.
He's actually such a gifted drummer that we didn't have any of the bad stuff. Plus, we built kind of like a soundproof music room.
That's smart.
Right? See, but that's what I mean. Like, both my kids love music. So what did we do? We took our whole garage and we converted it into a music room for them. And we went on a family trip, and everyone had saved their money, and we bought everything we needed, a sound system for them to start doing their own concerts. And, my oldest started teaching piano and had a piano studio for 4 years, sharing that with all sorts of different kids and adults and helping them. Like, my kids passions and dreams were something that I would never have squashed. It was like, how can I help this grow? I'll give everything I have to see this grow. And so if I could love my child that way, then God must love me even more.
Good.
One of the ways that I started to understand the nature of God was just that one day I was thinking about the scripture that says God is love. And I decided to take 1 Corinthians 13 and take the word love out and put the word God in everywhere that it said love. And I wrote it down in my journal, and that completely does not fit with that old, abusive version of God that I have. So it says things like God is patient, God is kind. Then it says, but it says things like God is not self-seeking. Wait a second. My entire life was that God needed us to worship him. He was like narcissistic and he needed to feel good about himself. That really made me think about God differently, because I thought, how psychotic would it be if I needed my kids to come up to me every day and tell me, oh, Mom, you're literally the most amazing person that ever lived. We are not worthy of you. Oh, Mom, we want to bow down before you.
And sing songs about Tineke.
It's just like God is not insecure, actually, wait a second, this act of worship that we thought we had to give by somehow building up his self-esteem is actually silly when you think about it. And it's not healthy. That would not be a healthy child-parent relationship.
Worship is supposed to be a response to the experience of being loved by him. And if we're not experiencing being loved by him, then we're not really worshiping him when we sing our songs.
Think just loving in general, just loving is worship. Loving others out of that abundance of love that we've experienced from God is work. It's not something you have to strive to do or even think about. It's just a natural partnership.
Well, Jesus said that, didn't he? He said, whenever you do this for the least of these, you've done it for me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the whole change that happened within me, right? And then, but carrying on with this, it was like God keeps no record of wrongs. Wait a second. If God is love and love keeps no record of wrongs, that means God keep no records of wrong,
Yeah. That's a biggie.
Then what about Judgment Day? I thought I was going to go there, and I always pictured it like God's going to have this big TV screen and he's going to show every shameful thing I ever did on the screen, and I'm going to have to face it and I'm going to be mortified. And then he's like, but wait, even though you're a piece of shit, Jesus died. So, okay, you can come in, that's how I pictured it, right? Some of the other things that stood out to me here was God always protects.
Wow.
I couldn't throw my children. If I threw my children into eternal torture, that would not be protecting. And so then, those things led me to start being like, well, I don't think that hell exists, or at least God doesn't send people there if God is actually love.
Yeah.
So this unraveling started happening, right?
Wow.
So
it was the same for me. I didn't set out to change what I believed. I encountered love. I heard God call me son. And the dominoes just started falling. And the more I encountered love, the more I entered into a place of being loved, and love giving me my worth and everything else and my identity. The less and less I could hold to those doctrines that I once thought were set in stone.
It's crazy how it really is. Like, God makes the blind to see, right? Like it literally was like that. It was like, once you could see, none of those old things made sense. You just saw right through them and how much actual damage they were doing as opposed to positive,
and I'll probably do a podcast with a couple of folks in this in the future, but I mean, I've ditched original sin. I've ditched hell. I've ditched penal substitutionary atonement. Just so many things that just are not God. If they don't look like love, exactly, they're not love. And I know, like, tough love, but no, that's not love. And people make this mistake. They say, "Oh, so God just lets you do whatever you want." And say, "Oh no, he doesn't." No, that's where if you think that, then you don't understand love. Yeah, because it's just that it now feels so wrong to do anything outside of love. And it's not like, oh, I feel like I'm a bad person for doing something outside of love. It just doesn't, that, you know how I used to feel like I was trying to fit the Christian wife mold and I didn't fit?
that's what it feels like now to try to do something unloving.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel right.
And I catch myself. I mean, I'll be in the middle of something, a thought, or going to say something, and all I hear, I just this little still voice in my heart just go, John, and I stop and just feel, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. What I'm going to say is of no benefit to anyone. Okay, I hear you. I've just been corrected. I've just been chastised.
But
in the most gentle of ways.
It's like, I think he just keeps showing us love so that we have that as a comparison.
Yeah.
Right? The way he is with us, if we're not being that way with someone else, all he has to do is put that little bit of love back on us, and we're like, oh man, I was just definitely outside of that kind of,
Yeah.
And after I had this transformation, like I told you, my kids were kind of like, oh my gosh, mom's so sad. And they were, because we were all in our tiny little house together for months on end, they were very aware of that. Then I started communicating with them about these questions I was having and thinking that God was different. And my kids were both like, mom is off her rocker, but we don't want her to be more sad. So we'll just listen. And then, I had this transformation, and within one day I was completely different. And after a month or two, my kids were like, especially Rain was like, I thought you were off your rocker, but you are so different now that you've experienced God in this way that I have to start looking into this myself, because I've seen such a change. So Rain was very, very involved with the youth group at a church in town. It was an evangelical church. We have friends in all the churches, and we were always very widespread about visiting and all that. So this was a place that Rain had grown up. Both my kids grew up going to youth group here, and then they got leadership positions as like student leaders. And so this was the one thing we didn't do together, but this was like Rain's entire passion was this youth group. This is their whole friend group. This was like the leaders. They were very close to like the youth pastor and the other adult leaders. And it was like, they didn't have friends outside of that. That was their world. And so about 6 months after I had my transformation, Rain started, getting a little quiet, and I knew something was going on because they were usually very open with me. And I figured it out. So I was like, I think that my child is gay and is scared to tell me. And because I had thanked God, this is how I know God is real. This is how I know God is love, because my heart had already been changed on that because of what God did inside of me. So if that wouldn't have happened, this whole coming out thing would have been so traumatic. It was already hard. Yeah. Anyway, that eventually Rain did get brave enough to tell me that they knew this about themselves. And thankfully I was able to respond with that God loves you no matter what. But it did compel me then to start doing a lot more looking into it. Because, when I was growing up, people that were gay, we were told they were that way because they were sexually abused, or they didn't have, a certain parent figure. So then that made them want to fill that hole. Like there was all of these reasons that people were gay. And of course it was a choice. It was not something that you were born with or anything. But now here I was looking at my child who had not been sexually abused, who had had so much love in their life from, we lived in the same town as both of our parents. So they have grandparents that love them, parents that love them. There was literally none of those reasons I've been given for why somebody would be gay had happened to my child.
Yeah.
So yes, God had changed my heart to feel like nothing but love and acceptance, but I still had to change my deeper ways of thinking about what would make someone that way. So then I had to start listening to podcasts from people that had grown up in the church and, been through so many different types of treatment to try to get, pray the gay away and all those things, and been suicidal. And one thing that stood out to me the most was when I was listening to this podcast with this young man who had, spent his entire life. He was open about it when he was younger. So then the rest of his, church experience for many years was people trying to prophesy over him, pray for healing for him to change this. And he had attempted suicide 3 times. And when I heard his explanation for why, it literally changed me. He said that he believed wholeheartedly so much that he was going to go to hell if he ever acted on it, that he thought it was better to kill himself before he had the chance to act on it. And I thought that is so sad. And that totally makes sense that a kid would get that message.
Yeah.
Because that's how I was introduced to it. When I was little, I didn't know anything about that kind of thing. My parents didn't talk about sex or anything, right? It was like you fast forwarded those parts in the movies. If you were watching them with your kids, to me, it was like, oh, that's a bad thing. Like I remember when I was in probably around 8 or 9 or 10 years old. And one of my friends said that, their parents were pregnant and it was because they'd had sex. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, there's no way, because that's bad. That is not the way people get pregnant. And so I came home and asked my parents, and they were like, yeah, it is. And my mind was blown because I'd only ever thought of it as something that was a sinful thing, right?
Yeah.
So the first time I had heard the word lesbian or something, I said to my dad, what's a lesbian? And he said, that's when two women kiss and then they go to hell. And I was terrified for years because I had played wedding with my little girlfriend, and I was the bride and she was the groom, and we had kissed. And I thought I was going to hell. I did for years. I thought I was going to hell because of that, So, I think about like these kids that have grown up knowing that there's something different about them, and how that they still believe that they're going to hell for it if they ever act on it. Like, that is so sad. I always thought, oh, they committed suicide because they knew that what they were doing was wrong, and they felt bad for it. But it was actually their attempt to please God, and that's terrifying.
That's scary. That's
terrifying.
So how did that change your relationship with Rain when they came out and told you, listen, this is who I am? Did it change your relationship? Did it affect it in any way?
We went through some things, but honestly, it was a relief because that month that I could tell that that's what they needed to tell me, but they were scared. They had really pulled away, and I was missing my child desperately during that time. And so when they came and told me, it was just like, oh, thank God that, we're close again and we can get through this. Yeah. But because of my own misconceptions, and Rain and I had always been really open with each other about our feelings, we had some difficult conversations because I still thought like, well, maybe there's some like reason that this is happening and it's not just the way you are, or why do you need to put a label on it? Does it matter? So I think in my ignorance, there was things that I said or asked that, probably hurt them, or, just showed my lack of understanding. And that's what made it important to me to start hearing from other people. And it just, blew my mind to start listening to the gay community. And this is the crazy thing, is like, as Christians, I felt like we were out there telling the gay community what's what and never listening to their own heart and their own experiences. And so that really changed me when I just went in with a heart of listening, not knowing, and admitted I actually know nothing about this,
Wow.
So Rain and I stayed close, but they were on a very painful journey. And as a parent, even though I loved and accepted Rain actually identifies, there's so many different labels now. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't keep track of them all. But Rain identifies as pan-romantic, which means they're attracted to any gender, whether they're non-binary or male or female. And Rain's also ace, which means they're asexual. They don't have any desire to ever have sex, which I think is funny because Christians immediately assume that if you're gay, it's about sex.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. That's the whole sin, is the sex. But that's actually for anybody that's asexual, that's not even a part of their relationship. No. It's actually just a romantic relationship.
Wow.
So anyway, I was so sad about what I knew my kid was going to go through. That was the hardest part about accepting it. Was not that I couldn't accept them. It was that my child had lived a really like sheltered life where they had just been loved and they hadn't encountered bullying or any of those things. And I knew that they had no idea what was coming. And that really broke my heart. It really broke my heart because as a parent, all you want to do is protect them. But because Rain was in leadership at this church, and like I knew that they don't accept gay anything. It's not like you can't go to church, right? We all know that you can go to church, not all churches, but most churches you can go if you're gay, but you can't be involved in any way. You can't minister in any way. You really can't express God in any way. you're like kind of muted, right? And so we had some talks. Rain was not planning on acting on this in any way. This was just something about them that they had discovered, but we felt it was important that Rain was honest with the youth leader and stuff about what they had discovered. And so they did have a meeting, and Rain was very brave and told them and stuff. And unfortunately, it was just kind of the expected response where, they were immediately shut out. They were, so they lost all their friends in one day. They never got a chance to say goodbye to anyone. And the really sad thing is that there were people within the youth group, there were young people that were attending that youth group that were gay and trans, that were literally only finding a safe place in like my children who were leaders there and accepting of those people. For a teenager at that stage of life to lose your entire friend group and the adult leaders that you literally have looked at as your heroes, and to have them reject you, it was devastating.
Yeah.
By the time Rain came out, Rain had reconciled with God, that God loved them the way he had made them. And I'm sure the people that are listening have noticed that we're using the pronouns they. And, throughout that journey, Rain also, identified as gender fluid and doesn't feel that they land in any one side of the gender spectrum. And that, again, was completely out of my realm of experience. Yeah. It took me a very long time to start saying the right pronouns and everything. But thankfully, Rain was patient. And, I had some really beautiful just kind of discoveries with God about that, about how God doesn't have one gender either. That is a beautiful picture of the fact that God carries the masculine and feminine within him. And so it was.
Here's the thing, Tineke, I want to ask you a question. Do you love Rain any less than you did before? Exactly.
Not at all.
Exactly.
Not at all. If anything, my desire to protect them is stronger, and oh man, we went on a journey with it, because obviously Rain's mental health was affected massively. And that's the thing that I think is so wrong, is that a lot of the Christian community, they look at the stats for anxiety, depression, and suicide in the gay community, and they say, oh, see, it's because of sin. But no, it's not. It's because of how they're being treated by the people that claim to be serving the God of unconditional love. So,
but it's easy, isn't it, to say, well, those are just horrible people. But actually, when we look at the system that's been built, and it shapes us into those horrible people, because none of us start out that way.
No,
even when we get born again or saved or whatever you want to call it, in that system, we don't come into it that way as horrible people. But it squeezes us and molds us. And like you said, you were brought up and you had a choice to conform or to keep stepping outside of the boundaries and be punished and shamed for it. And sometimes the punishment and the shame just gets too much, and you just conform, and what you wear is being squeezed out, and what's left is this horrible shell that looks like you. Wow.
But I wrote a poem about the people that have stepped in. God has sent so many people, yourself included, that have taken me under their wing and given me that fatherly love. So I feel like I'm not doing anything.
Let's hear it.
Better.
Let's hear the poem.
It's in the book, so you've probably read it.
Yeah, but I've not heard you reading it.
Okay, well, let me try. So the poem is called Letting Go and Finding, and it's about my relationship with my dad and my heavenly parental figure. In this poem, I still refer to God as Father, because that's kind of how it was presented to me growing up. So, letting go and finding. I wonder why I always felt the heaviness of your happiness. Why did I carry your weight on my tiny shoulders? If you're happy, I'm happy, or so I thought. A little girl could never anticipate all the ways you'd find to be dissatisfied, or all the scriptures you'd never hesitate to use as weapons of mass destruction. A child could never predict that the only way to remain in your love was to disappear altogether and cease to exist at all. Follow in Daddy's footsteps, they said. So I tried to bleed out all that wasn't right by cutting my own flesh. But little did I know you'd take it one step further by cutting out your own flesh and blood and throwing me away. A daughter of God made in his image can't know her father when her father has made God in his own image and is not conformed to this world, but is transformed by the clothing of his mind. What does your dad think, they ask? Which dad, I wonder? You who lives by the law of stepping away, or the stepdads who have stepped up, stepped forward, and walked each step by my side. I wonder why it took half a lifetime for me to let go and let you go and go to a father's lap who loves and loves and loves and loves.
Wow. Tineke, we could talk for ages, but I think that's a great place to end with that poem. It kind of sums up where you've arrived at for the moment. Yeah. Whether it's your final destination or not, who knows?
It'll always be love, and just different ways of finding and discovering that.
But thank you so much for being a guest. I'm so pleased that we were able to connect and do this little podcast. And I'm sure...
Well, thank you so much.
I'm sure it's going to bless a lot of people.
Well, I'm always willing to share my story. So thank you for asking, and just also for being such a friend and helping me through some really hard times. So I'm glad we're on the other side of that now.
That's a pleasure.